Rattlesnake Wells, The Apache Sirens' Deadly Midnight Challenge, 1878. Here's a true life-inspired story outline for Rattlesnake Wells, The Apache Sirens' Deadly Midnight Challenge, 1878 inches in a third-person style, divided into 5 parts. Part 1, the whispering shadows, wily expanse of the arid desolate expanse of the Arizona desert became home to a chilling legend, Rattlesnake Wells. Known for its treacherous rattlesnakes and harsh conditions, it was a place few dared to linger. But on this fateful night, a small group of settlers and soldiers arrived seeking water after a long trek. Unbeknownst to them, the well was not only a lifeline for weary travelers, but also a cursed spot, haunted by the ghostly presence of an Apache woman known as the Apache Siren. The soldiers set up camp near the well. Their commander, Captain James Aldridge, thought little of the local rumors about strange noises echoing from the nearby cliffs at midnight, brushed them off as superstitions, but his men, uneasy under the vast dark skies, whispered nervously about the legend of the Apache Siren, an eerie figure said to lure men to their deaths with her hauntingly beautiful voice. As night deepened, the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom, and the wind carried an unusual melodic hum. Part 2, The Midnight Challenge. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, something shifted in the atmosphere. At exactly midnight, a voice, soft yet powerful, swept across the camp. It was as though the wind itself had spoken, but the soldiers knew it was the voice of the Apache Siren. The voice called to the men, singling out Captain Aldridge, urging him to come closer to the well. The soldiers were frozen, unsure whether they were hearing the real Apache woman or merely a specter from the past. Captain Aldridge, skeptical but compelled by an irresistible urge, rose from his bedroll. He glanced at his men, who looked on in horror as their commander began to move toward the well. In his mind, he heard only the call of the Apache Siren, a sound so mesmerizing that it drowned out all fear and reason. As he reached the edge of the well, the air grew colder, and a sudden flash of movement caught his eye. A shadowy figure, impossibly beautiful, appeared on the other side of the well, her dark eyes glowing in the moonlight. Part 3, A Dance with Death. The figure beckoned Aldridge closer, her features almost ethereal in the moonlight. She was clothed in the tattered remnants of an Apache warrior's outfit, her hair flowing around her face like a curtain of black silk. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice like a song that promised both pleasure and pain. Her haunting melody seemed to draw him in, and despite the chilling warning from his soldiers, Aldridge stepped closer, captivated by her presence. As he reached the edge of the well, a faint, mournful song filled the air. It was as though the desert itself had come alive with the spirit of 1,000 lost souls. The Apache Siren reached out, her fingers grazing his arm, sending a shiver down his spine. "I will not let you go, Captain," she said, her words sinking into his mind like a poison. But Aldridge, though entranced, knew deep down that his life was in danger. He tried to break free, but the siren's grip tightened. Suddenly his soldiers surged forward, pulling Aldridge back from the edge. But it was too late. The Apache Siren had left her mark on him, an invisible bond that would not let go. The desert air seemed to hold its breath as the camp fell into an uneasy silence, the echo of the siren's song still lingering in the night. Part 4, The Curse Unfolds. In the days that followed, Captain Aldridge became a shell of the man he once was. His sleep was haunted by visions of the Apache Siren, and he would often wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing her voice calling to him. He had become obsessed with her, as though the curse of the siren had woven itself into his very soul. The soldiers, now fearful for their own safety, began to question whether the Apache Siren was a real living woman or a vengeful spirit. Some believed the well was cursed, while others thought Aldridge's obsession with the siren was a result of his own guilt over past sins. As the days wore on, the men noticed strange occurrences, objects disappearing, eerie whispers in the wind, and an oppressive feeling in the air. By the 5th night, the tension had reached a boiling point. Aldridge, driven nearly mad by the siren's call, led a small group of soldiers back to the well, determined to confront the curse once and for all. The Apache Siren, her figure barely visible in the moonlight, stood at the edge of the well, waiting. With a cruel smile, she beckoned Aldridge forward once more, and this time he could not resist. Part 5, The Final Reckoning. As Captain Aldridge stepped forward, the other soldiers too followed, no longer able to ignore the pull of the siren's call. The wind howled and the moon seemed to glow brighter than ever, illuminating the scene with a cold, unforgiving light. In that moment, the Apache Siren's true nature was revealed. She was not just a ghost or a spirit. She was a powerful entity, a being forged from the desert's unforgiving wrath and the grief of a people betrayed by broken promises. The soldiers, one by one, fell under her spell. But Captain Aldridge, realizing too late the trap he had walked into, tried to break free. In a final act of defiance, he shouted to his men, urging them to fight back against the siren's grip. But the curse had already taken hold of them all. One by one, they succumbed to the pull of the Apache siren, vanishing into the desert night, leaving only the echo of her haunting song. The next morning, the well was empty. No trace of the soldiers or Aldridge remained. Only the wind whispered of the deadly midnight challenge, a challenge no man was ever meant to survive. The sun had just set over the vast, dry desert of Arizona, and the wind picked up carrying the heavy scent of dust. Rattlesnake Wells, a lonely watering hole in the desert, stood like an oasis in the middle of nothingness. This place had seen many travelers come and go over the years, and many of them had heard the rumors. Some spoke of a mysterious woman, an Apache who roamed the desert in the dead of night, luring men to their doom. She was called the Apache Siren, a name that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to speak it aloud. Captain James Aldridge and his group of soldiers were weary from the long march across the dry, unforgiving desert. They had been traveling for days without rest, their water supply running dangerously low. They had heard stories of this place, Rattlesnake Wells, but they did not take them seriously. Superstitions, they thought. The Apache had always been mysterious, and tales like these were just that, tales. As they approached the well, Captain Aldridge surveyed the land. The ground beneath their boots was cracked and dry, and the air shimmered with heat even as night began to fall. There was no sign of life anywhere. No animals, no birds, not even a breeze, just the endless desert stretching out in every direction. "Let's set up camp here," Aldridge called out, his voice hoarse from the long journey. He had been the one to lead them here, and despite the rumors, he was confident this would be a safe place to rest. His men followed his orders without question, too exhausted to argue. The soldiers went about their work, setting up tents and securing their camp. Some went to the well, filling their canteens, while others began preparing a fire. As the campfire flickered to life, Aldridge settled down near the fire with a heavy sigh. He took a long drink from his canteen and leaned back, staring up at the clear night sky. The stars were brighter here than anywhere else, a brilliant display of light against the dark canvas above, but even as the fire crackled, Aldridge couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too quiet, too still. He could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke. He glanced over at his men, but they seemed as weary as he was, all of them too exhausted to notice the strange calm that had settled over the camp. "That's strange," Sergeant Turner, one of the soldiers, muttered from the other side of the fire. "It's too quiet." Aldridge didn't respond immediately. He had heard the same thing, but he didn't want to admit it. There were no sounds of wildlife, no howls of coyotes in the distance, no rustling of leaves or bushes, just the wind, dry and hot, whispering through the cracks in the desert floor. "We've probably just gotten too used to the noise of the march," Aldridge said, trying to convince himself more than his men. "Get some rest, men. Tomorrow we move on." But even as he said it, he felt an uneasy knot form in his stomach. Something was not right about this place. It was as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The desert was alive with an ancient energy, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He glanced at the well again, the dark hole in the earth standing like a silent sentinel in the middle of their camp. The fire flickered, casting strange shadows that danced along the rocks and the surrounding trees. As the wind whispered through the camp, Aldridge thought he heard something. A soft sound, like a voice carried on the wind. It was faint at first, like a distant hum, but then it became clearer, a melody that seemed to flow in and out of the air. Aldridge frowned. He glanced over at his men. They were still moving about, preparing their things, oblivious to the sound, but now that it had caught his attention, he could not ignore it. The sound grew louder, like the sweet, haunting melody of a woman singing in a language he couldn't understand. The sound seemed to come from all around them, yet there was no one in sight. "Did you hear that?" Aldridge asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper. He looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. It was as if the desert itself had come alive. Sergeant Turner turned to him, a look of confusion on his face. "What do you mean, sir?" Aldridge's eyes narrowed, and he stood up. The melody seemed to be calling to him, pulling at something deep inside him. He could feel the pull, like a whisper in his mind, urging him forward. "I thought I heard something." A voice. Turner looked uneasy, glancing nervously at the well. "Sir, I've heard stories about this place. About the Apache siren. They say she calls to men from the well, and once they answer her, they disappear." Aldridge shook his head, dismissing the superstition. He was a man of reason, not one to be swayed by stories. But as the night wore on, and the strange melody continued to play in the background, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. As midnight approached, the wind picked up, carrying the voice with it. It was no longer just a melody. It was a clear, distinct voice calling to him, whispering his name. It was like a siren's song, tempting him to step closer to the well, to answer the call. He could feel the pull, the irresistible urge to go, to see who or what was speaking to him. But as he stood there, frozen in place, he realized that the others had noticed the sound too. They were looking around, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. They knew the stories, just as Aldridge did. The Apache siren was a legend, but now, in this moment, it seemed to be more than just a tale. Aldridge turned to his men, his voice steady. "Stay close. Whatever happens, do not wander off." But even as he spoke, he knew his words were empty. The song continued to grow louder, and the pull of the well seemed to grow stronger. It was as though the desert was calling to them, urging them to come closer, to step into its grasp. The wind howled, the fire flickered, and the night seemed to stretch on forever. The Apache siren's voice was now unmistakable, a haunting melody that seemed to echo from the well itself. It called to him, and this time Aldridge could not resist. His feet moved on their own, carrying him toward the well. The others watched in fear as their captain walked toward the dark hole in the ground, his face pale in the moonlight. As he stepped closer to the well, Aldridge could feel his heart race. The air grew colder, the wind picking up in intensity. The voice was louder now, clearer, and he could almost see her, a shadowy figure at the edge of the well, waiting. The Apache siren. Aldridge didn't know why he couldn't stop himself. He had to go closer, to see who was calling to him. His men shouted behind him, but the sound of their voices seemed far away, drowned out by the melody. The moment he reached the well, everything went still. The wind stopped. The voice stopped. Aldridge stood at the edge of the well, staring down into the darkness below. The desert had gone quiet again, and for a moment it felt as though time had stopped. But Aldridge could not shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. As Captain Aldridge stood at the edge of the well, staring down into the blackness, his mind was in a whirlwind. The eerie silence that had fallen over the camp was thick, suffocating, and the only sound was the distant howl of the desert wind. The Apache siren's voice had faded, but the echo of her call lingered in his mind, like a whisper that wouldn't let go. Something deep inside him urged him to step forward, to reach into the dark and seek what lay hidden below. The soldiers behind him watched with fearful eyes, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. They had seen their captain, strong, resolute, and always in control, fall into a trance as though he were no longer fully in command of himself. His gaze was locked on the well, and nothing could break his focus. "Captain?" Sergeant Turner's voice cracked through the tension, but Aldridge didn't respond. Turner's hand reached out to grab Aldridge's arm, but the captain shrugged it off with a sudden, almost violent jerk. "Do not touch me," Aldridge muttered, his voice low and strained. "I need to see it. I need to know what's down there." Turner took a cautious step back, his face pale as he looked around the camp. The other soldiers were equally unsettled, their eyes darting between the captain and the well. They had all heard the stories, the warnings about the Apache siren. They had always assumed it was just a myth, a tale told around campfires to frighten the young recruits. But now, in the middle of the desert, with the well staring back at them like an open mouth, they realized how close they had come to something far darker than they could have imagined. Captain Aldridge's gaze remained fixed on the well. The black hole below seemed to pulse like it was alive, drawing him in. His chest tightened as the call returned, louder this time, more insistent. He could hear the voice now, clearer than before. It was beautiful, soft, like a song that could melt the hardest of hearts. The words were foreign, yet they seemed familiar. He understood them, as though they were meant only for him. "Come closer, Captain," the voice beckoned, its tone both sweet and commanding. "I am waiting." Aldridge's hands trembled as he took a step closer to the well. His breath quickened and his heart raced in his chest, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was an overwhelming curiosity, a pull stronger than anything he had ever felt. Every fiber of his being told him to walk away, but he couldn't. The voice was too powerful, too alluring. It seemed to call out from the depths of the earth itself, offering something beyond his understanding. He looked back at his men, their faces filled with fear, their voices shaking as they tried to pull him away. "Sir, don't go any further. You don't know what's down there. The stories, they're real," Turner shouted, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Aldridge turned away from his men, completely ignoring their cries. "Stay back," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "This is something I must do." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances but made no move to stop him. There was nothing they could do. They knew this was beyond them. Whatever had hold of their captain was something they could not fight with mere strength. Aldridge's fingers brushed the rough stone at the edge of the well, his mind still fixated on the voice that called to him from below. It was almost as if he were in a trance. The world around him faded away, and there was only the well and the voice. It was as if the desert itself had wrapped its arms around him, holding him in place. He was no longer aware of time or space. All that mattered was the pull of the well and the mystery that lay beneath. "Come," the voice whispered again, more softly this time, like a lover's promise. "You are the one, the only one who can hear me." Aldridge could feel the cold air rising from the depths of the well, a chill that made his skin crawl. The air around him grew still, and for a moment he felt as if the desert had become a part of him. He could taste the dust on his lips, and the world seemed to close in, the well becoming the center of everything. His breath was shallow, his body rigid as the voice continued to beckon him. Without thinking, he took another step, then another, moving closer to the edge. His boots scraped against the dry earth, the sound breaking the silence like the crack of thunder. But still, the voice called to him, louder and more insistent. It was no longer a song, it had become a demand, pulling him toward the well with an invisible force that he could not resist. Suddenly there was a rustling sound behind him, a shift in the air that made him pause. The soldiers had gathered, their eyes wide with panic. They had not been able to stop him before, but now they moved as one, their steps heavy on the earth. They reached for him, trying to pull him away from the edge of the well, but it was as if he were anchored in place, unable to move. It was the pull of the siren, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. "Captain, no!" Turner cried, his hand grabbing Aldridge's arm with desperate force. "Snap out of it!" "This isn't you. It's the curse of the Apache siren." But Aldridge didn't hear him. He couldn't hear anything except the voice. It had taken over his mind, and there was nothing left for him but the well and the call that came from deep within it. His mind raced, images flashing before his eyes, visions of a woman, an Apache, her face hidden behind a veil of darkness. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. She stood at the edge of the well, her hand reaching out to him, her voice soft and inviting. It was the same woman he had seen in his dreams, the one whose voice had haunted him since they had arrived at Rattlesnake Wells. He recognized her now. She was real. She was the Apache siren, the one who had been waiting for him. The voice seemed to grow louder, more forceful, as if urging him to take the final step. Aldridge felt his body move on its own, the pull too strong to resist. He reached out, his hands trembling, and before he could stop himself, he was leaning over the well, his body hanging dangerously close to the edge. It was at that moment that the world seemed to shift. The desert seemed to breathe, and a gust of wind swept through the camp, knocking over the fire and sending the soldiers scrambling to steady themselves. The light from the flames flickered and died, casting the camp into complete darkness. The voice echoed in his mind, louder than ever. "Come to me, Captain. You belong to me." Aldridge's heart raced. He could feel the pull of the well stronger than ever before, but something in his mind screamed to pull away, to fight the force that gripped him. He tried to step back, but it was as though something inside him resisted. He was caught between two forces, the voice that called to him, and the rational part of his mind that urged him to escape. But in that moment, something strange happened. The voice faltered, just for a second. There was a pause, a hesitation in the pull. And then, without warning, the wind shifted again, and the voice disappeared. Aldridge stood frozen, his body shaking, his mind racing. He didn't know whether he had been saved or cursed. But one thing was certain. The Apache siren's call had only just begun. The wind howled through the camp, carrying the scent of the desert with it. The fire, which had moments ago been crackling brightly, now lay in embers, its light fading into the darkness. Captain Aldridge stood at the edge of the well, his breath shallow and rapid, his heart pounding in his chest. The pull of the Apache siren was still strong, but it had weakened just enough for him to snap back to his senses, or so he thought. His mind was still clouded, and his body trembled with the after-effects of the siren's voice. The soldiers, who had been too afraid to act just moments ago, now gathered around him, each one looking at him with a mixture of confusion and worry. They could see the change in him, the way his eyes seemed distant, as if he was no longer fully present. Sergeant Turner stepped forward cautiously, his face filled with concern. "Captain, are you all right?" Turner's voice was low, barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile moment of clarity that had washed over Aldridge. For a moment, Aldridge didn't answer. His mind was still racing, still hearing the faint echo of the siren's song, which seemed to linger in his head even though she had stopped calling. He could feel the pull again, just beneath the surface, a constant, nagging sensation that refused to let go. I don't know, Aldridge muttered, shaking his head as if to clear it. I thought I could hear her, the voice. It's like it's still in my head. Turner exchanged a worried glance with the other soldiers. They had heard the stories, but none of them had expected this. The captain, their strong and fearless leader, now seemed as though he had been touched by something they couldn't understand, something that wasn't of this world. "We need to get away from this well, sir," Turner insisted, his voice growing more urgent. "This place, it's cursed." "We can't stay here." Aldrich looked at him, his brow furrowing. The words didn't quite make sense, but the fear in Turner's eyes was undeniable. He glanced around at the men, who were all looking to him for direction. The uncertainty in their faces mirrored his own inner turmoil. He knew they were right. This place had become more than just a well. It had become a trap, a place that held them in its grip, slowly drawing them in. But something inside him resisted. He couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. The siren's call was still too strong, and he didn't understand why he felt so compelled to stay. "I can't leave," Aldridge said, his voice hoarse. "Not yet. I have to know what's happening. Why is this happening?" The soldiers looked at one another, their expressions troubled. They had always trusted their captain, but now it seemed as though he was slipping away from them, pulled by forces beyond their control. They couldn't understand it, but they knew they couldn't let him face this alone. "We'll stay with you, sir," Turner said, stepping closer, placing a hand on Aldridge's shoulder. "But we need to be careful." "This place isn't what it seems." Aldridge nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The siren's voice was fading, but it hadn't completely disappeared. He could still hear it, faintly, in the back of his mind, a haunting melody that called to him, pulling him deeper into the desert. He glanced once more at the well, the dark hole that seemed to promise answers but also danger. "We'll keep our distance," Turner added, "but we need to make sure we stay together. Whatever this is, we face it as a group." The captain nodded again, but he wasn't truly listening. His eyes were fixed on the well, as if something in its depths was calling to him once more. He could feel it, a presence, a force that was alive, waiting for him to come closer. He tried to shake off the feeling, tried to focus on his men, but the pull was too strong. It was as if the well itself had become a living thing, breathing, waiting, watching. Without warning, Aldridge turned and began walking away from the campfire, his footsteps slow but purposeful. The soldiers called out to him, but he didn't hear them. His mind was clouded and his body moved without his consent. The pull of the well was overwhelming and he couldn't fight it any longer. "Captain! Where are you going?" Turner shouted, his voice laced with panic. Aldridge didn't answer. His legs carried him toward the well, his mind still trapped in the siren's grip. He didn't want to go, but something inside him told him he had no choice. The voice, faint but persistent, echoed in his mind. "Come to me," it whispered, like a lover calling him home. "You are mine." His feet moved faster now, as if guided by some unseen force. The soldiers, seeing the captain slipping away, rushed after him, their hearts pounding in their chests. They tried to catch up, but Aldridge was moving too quickly, his mind too far gone. The well was close now, its dark mouth waiting for him, and he could almost feel the siren's presence, standing at the edge of the darkness, waiting for him to step into her embrace. When Aldridge reached the edge of the well, he stopped. His breathing was heavy, and his body was shaking, but he couldn't bring himself to turn away. The voice was there, clearer than ever, pulling him closer. "You came," the voice purred, as though it were pleased. "I knew you would. Now you are mine." Aldridge's hands trembled as he reached for the well. His fingers brushed the rough stone, and for a brief moment it felt as if the earth beneath him were alive, breathing with him. He could almost hear the siren's footsteps, echoing from the depths of the well. She was waiting for him. He knew it. His mind screamed at him to pull back, to turn around, to leave this place and never look back, but his body refused to obey. The pull was too strong. It was as if the well had become a part of him, its darkness sinking deep into his soul. The desert was no longer just a place. It had become a living thing, and he was its prisoner. Behind him, Turner and the other soldiers finally caught up, their faces pale with fear. They saw Aldridge standing at the edge of the well, his body shaking, his eyes distant, as if he were lost to them. They tried to shout, to pull him away, but it was too late. The siren's call was too strong, and Aldridge was too far gone. Aldridge took another step closer to the well, his hands reaching out. He could feel her presence, a cold chill creeping up his spine. The Apache siren was waiting for him. She had been waiting for this moment, and now he could feel her power wrapping around him like a vice, tightening, pulling him into the dark depths. In that moment, as he stood on the edge of the well, the world seemed to disappear. The soldiers' shouts faded away, and all that mattered was the darkness, the siren, and the pull of the well. He was no longer in control. He was hers. The last thing Aldridge saw before everything went dark was the flicker of the moonlight reflecting off the still water at the bottom of the well. And then everything went silent. The camp was silent, except for the soft rustle of wind through the desert. The soldiers stood in a circle, looking at one another with wide, fearful eyes, uncertain of what had just happened. Their captain, the man who had always led them with strength and purpose, had slipped away into the darkness, pulled by something none of them could understand. They had tried to stop him, but it had been as if he were no longer the man they knew. He had walked toward the well, his body moving without hesitation, as if something stronger than his own will had taken control of him. Sergeant Turner paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists, his mind racing. He couldn't understand it. Aldridge had always been a man of reason, someone who wouldn't fall for superstitions or myths. Yet here he was, gone, drawn toward the very thing they had been warned about, the Apache siren. Turner had heard the stories, but he never believed them to be true. He had always thought they were just tales meant to frighten the young soldiers. But now, with the captain gone and the well standing silent in the darkness, Turner was no longer sure of anything. "Where did he go?" one of the soldiers whispered, his voice shaky. "I don't know," Turner replied, his voice tight. "But we need to find him. We can't leave him out there." The other soldiers nodded, their faces pale, their bodies stiff with fear. They had all seen the way Aldridge had been pulled toward the well, as though he were no longer in control of his own actions. Something had changed in him, and none of them knew how to bring him back. But Turner couldn't just leave his captain to whatever fate awaited him in the darkness of the well. "Let's go," Turner said, his voice firm. "We're not leaving without him." The soldiers gathered their weapons, their movements hesitant, as if the desert itself were watching them. They had no idea what they were about to face, but they knew they couldn't stand by and do nothing. They had to follow their captain, no matter how dangerous it might be. The air was thick with the scent of dust and the faintest trace of something sweet, something that didn't belong in the dry desert. It was the scent of the siren, lingering in the air, faint but unmistakable. As they approached the well, Turner's heart began to race. The moonlight cast long shadows across the desert, and the well, once just a simple watering hole, now seemed like a portal to something far darker. The soldiers stopped at the edge of the well, their eyes searching the dark pit, but there was nothing there. The pull of the siren's voice was gone, leaving behind an unsettling silence. For a moment it felt as if the desert had swallowed everything, leaving only the wind and the night. But Turner knew better. He knew the danger was still there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for them to come closer. "We have to get him back," Turner said, his voice low but determined. "Aldridge wouldn't want us to give up on him." The soldiers nodded, but none of them moved. They stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the well, their minds clouded with doubt. Turner felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but he shook it off. There was no time for fear. The captain had trusted him to lead, and he would do everything he could to bring Aldridge back. He took a step forward, the dry earth crunching beneath his boots. His breath was shallow, his chest tight, but he pushed forward, drawing his courage from the duty he had sworn to uphold. He had to do this for his men, for the captain, and for himself. Slowly the others followed. They moved together, each step heavy with uncertainty. They reached the edge of the well, their faces illuminated by the pale light of the moon. Turner could see the shadows cast by the rocks around the well, long and twisted, and for a moment it seemed as if they were reaching toward him, trying to pull him in. He shook his head, trying to clear the fear that clouded his mind. But then he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. Aldridge was standing at the edge of the well, his back to them, his body stiff and unmoving. His eyes were wide open, but they were distant, as though he were no longer aware of the world around him. His gaze was fixed on something below, deep within the well, and his face was expressionless, like a man lost in a trance. "Captain!" Turner shouted, his voice breaking through the silence. "Aldridge! Come back." But Aldridge didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. It was as though he couldn't hear them at all. Turner stepped forward, his hands reaching out, trying to grab the captain's shoulder, but before he could make contact, Aldridge spoke. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it sent a chill down Turner's spine. "You don't understand," Aldridge said, his voice hollow, empty. She is waiting for me. Turner froze, his hand still hovering above Aldridge's shoulder. The words made no sense, but the tone in the captain's voice was clear. He was not the same man they had known. Something had changed in him, something beyond their control. She? Turner asked, his voice shaking. Who are you talking about, sir? Aldridge didn't answer. Instead, he turned slowly toward the well, his eyes locked on the darkness below. Turner could see the pain in his captain's face, the way his body trembled, as if fighting against something stronger than his will. It was as if Aldridge was caught between two worlds, one foot in the desert and one in the abyss. She's the one who called to me, Aldridge whispered, his voice barely audible. The Apache siren. She is the one I was meant to find. Turner's heart sank. He had heard the stories, but he had never believed them. He had always thought they were just stories, tales meant to scare the young men. But now, as he watched Aldridge, his captain lost to the siren's pull, Turner realized that the desert had claimed them both. The Apache siren was real, and she was powerful. We can't leave him like this, Turner said, his voice firm. We have to bring him back, no matter what it takes. The soldiers stood in silence, unsure of what to do next. They were afraid of what they didn't understand, afraid of what they couldn't fight. But they couldn't abandon their captain. They had to try. Turner stepped closer to Aldridge, his hand reaching out again. This time, he gripped the captain's arm, shaking him gently. Aldridge, listen to me. You're not alone. We're here. We're not going to leave you. His body was stiff, his gaze still locked on the well, but then, slowly, his eyes shifted toward Turner, and for the briefest of moments, he seemed to return to himself. His face softened, and a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. I can't fight it, Aldridge whispered, his voice filled with desperation. She won't let me go. He knew they had to do something, anything, to break the siren's hold on their captain, but in that moment, he felt helpless. How could they fight something so powerful, something that had already claimed their leader? The wind picked up again, howling through the desert, and the siren's voice echoed in the air, distant but unmistakable. It was calling to them, calling to Aldridge, and Turner knew they had little time left. We'll fight for you, sir, Turner said, his voice strong. You don't have to do this alone. And with that, the soldiers moved closer, determined to bring Aldridge back from the brink, even if it meant facing the darkness of the well itself. The desert seemed to come alive around them, the wind picking up, whipping dust and sand into the air. The night was cold, yet a strange warmth still seemed to radiate from the well, as if the earth itself was pulsing with energy. Captain Aldridge stood motionless at the edge of the well, his eyes fixed on the darkness below, his body rigid with tension. The soldiers, despite their fear, stood close behind him, watching, waiting. Turner's grip on Aldridge's arm tightened, as though trying to anchor him to the earth, trying to prevent him from slipping away. Aldridge, Turner said again, his voice steady but filled with worry. We can fight this. You have to come back with us. The siren, she doesn't have control over you. For a brief moment, Aldridge's body twitched, and for a heartbeat, it seemed as though he might respond. His eyes shifted slightly, but the vacant expression returned almost immediately. The pull of the siren's call was too strong, and it felt like nothing could break it. The wind howled once more, and the voice of the siren echoed faintly in the air. It wasn't as loud as before, but it still reached Aldridge's ears, beckoning him, calling him deeper into the dark abyss of the well. You can't fight her, Captain, one of the soldiers said quietly. She's already taken hold of you. Turner's eyes narrowed as he turned to face the soldier. No, we're not giving up on him. We're getting him out of here. But even as he spoke, Turner wasn't sure what to do. Aldridge had been so strong, so resolute, but now he stood before them as if he were nothing more than a puppet, his strings pulled by something far greater than their understanding. He had been the leader, the one who guided them through every challenge, and now he was lost to them, lost to the desert and the siren's call. We'll have to act quickly, Turner muttered, more to himself than anyone else. We need to find a way to break her hold. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. The stories they had heard about the Apache siren were just that. Stories. Tales of an ancient spirit, a woman whose voice could lure men to their doom. But now, standing on the edge of the well, with their captain in front of them, it was clear that these weren't just tales. They had witnessed it themselves. Turner looked down at the ground, his mind racing. He had to think of something, anything, to help Aldridge. There had to be a way to break the curse. to pull their captain back from the darkness. But how? The stories had spoken of magic, of rituals, of offerings. But none of that seemed to matter now. All that mattered was that Aldridge was slipping away, and they had to do something before it was too late. In that moment, something caught Turner's eye. He noticed the shadows around the well shifting in a strange way, as though they were alive, moving on their own. He stepped closer, his instincts telling him to be cautious, to watch for something, anything that might be a clue. And then he saw it, an old weathered symbol carved into the stone near the well. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there, etched into the rock as if it had been placed there by someone long ago. Turner crouched down, his hand brushing over the symbol, feeling the rough texture of the carvings. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it was important. This, Turner muttered to himself. This is a sign. There's something here, something that can help us. The other soldiers gathered around, their eyes scanning the symbol, trying to make sense of it. None of them recognized the markings, but they could feel the weight of its presence, as if the symbol was part of the very land itself. It was as if the desert had been waiting for this moment, for someone to notice, for someone to understand. Turner stood up, looking at Aldridge. The captain's face was still blank, his body still, but Turner could see the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes. He wasn't entirely gone. There was still a part of him there, a part that was fighting to break free. Turner knew they had to act fast. "We need to perform something," Turner said, his voice firm. "We have to break the siren's hold on him. It's the only way." The soldiers nodded, their faces filled with determination. They had no idea what they were doing, but they couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Aldridge had always been their leader, their guide, and they would not let him slip away without a fight. Turner motioned for the others to step back, giving him space to work. He knelt down by the symbol, his mind racing as he tried to remember the old tales, the ones that spoke of the siren and her power. He couldn't remember all the details, but one thing stood out. There was a way to break her hold, a way to sever the connection between the siren and her victim. He had to act quickly. Turner closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to focus. He reached out, his hand hovering over the symbol, his fingers trembling. He had no idea if this would work, but he knew they had no other choice. The siren's call was growing stronger, her power pulling Aldridge toward the well, toward the darkness below. He muttered the words he had heard in the old stories, the ones that spoke of breaking curses, of pushing back the darkness. He didn't know if the words held any real power, but they felt right. They felt like the only thing that could save Aldridge. As Turner spoke, the wind picked up, swirling around them, as if the desert itself was reacting to his words. The symbol beneath his hand began to glow faintly, a soft light pulsing from the stone, as though it were alive. The earth trembled beneath them, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Aldridge's body jerked, and Turner saw his eyes flicker. The captain's face was still pale, his expression distant, but there was a change in him, a flicker of awareness, a brief moment of clarity. It was enough. "Captain!" Turner shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. "Fight it. You're not alone." Aldridge's eyes focused on him, and for a moment it seemed as though he could see Turner clearly. His lips parted, as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. His body shook, as if caught between two worlds, one foot in the darkness of the well, the other on the edge of the light. Turner reached out, his hand gripping Aldridge's arm, pulling him back from the well. The captain's body trembled, but Turner didn't let go. He held on, using every ounce of strength he had to pull Aldridge away from the edge, away from the siren's grip. The wind howled, but Turner didn't let it stop him. The soldiers gathered around, each of them offering their strength, their support, as they pulled Aldridge back from the well, back into the light. Slowly, but surely, the captain's eyes cleared, and the pull of the siren's voice began to fade. They had done it. They had brought their captain back from the edge of the darkness. But as they stepped away from the well, their hearts still pounding, they knew the desert would always remember the Apache siren, and they would never forget the night they faced her call.